I never imagined that an ordinary afternoon at my own home would turn into one of the biggest legal victories of my life. But sometimes all it takes is one moment where you refuse to stay silent. It started quietly, almost innocently, when I stepped into my backyard and noticed a group of people walking around, pointing at things, taking notes, and acting far too comfortable for people who absolutely did not belong there. At first, I thought maybe they were lost or confused, but then it hit me. They were inside my property lines, past the fence, standing on land I legally owned. When I approached them and calmly asked what they were doing, they barely looked surprised. One of them casually said they were from the HOA and were conducting an inspection, as if that single word magically gave them permission to enter my private property without notice, without consent, and without any legal authority. That moment was the first red flag, the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was trespassing. Instead of yelling or causing a scene, I took a breath and asked a simple question. Can you show me written permission or any notice that allows you to be here? The response I got was a smirk and a vague explanation about HOA rules, which told me everything I needed to know. They didn't have permission. They didn't have paperwork. They were relying purely on confidence and the assumption that I wouldn't challenge them. That's when I politely but firmly told them they needed to leave immediately. Rather than apologizing, they pushed back, insisting they had the right to be there. That was the exact second I decided to stop arguing and start documenting that. I pulled out my phone and began recording everything. Who they were, where they were standing, the lack of any posted notices, and the clear boundary markers that defined my land. I took photos, videos, and screenshots, making sure timestamps were visible. Later that same day, I pulled out my property deed, land survey documents, and every piece of paperwork that clearly proved the exact limits of my property. What the HOA didn't realize was that arrogance doesn't hold up in court. Evidence does. They eventually left, clearly annoyed, but I knew this was far from over. A few days later, just as I expected, the HOA made their next move. I received an official-looking letter filled with warnings, fines, and legal threats, accusing me of non-compliance and suggesting further action if I didn't cooperate. Reading that letter made one thing very clear. They were trying to intimidate me into backing down. They assumed I'd be scared of legal language, scared of authority, and scared of the cost of fighting back. But instead of panicking, I felt something else. Confidence. Because now I had proof, and they had made a paper trail that showed harassment and abuse of power. That's when I decided to speak with a property rights attorney. I walked into the office with a folder full of documents, videos, photos, and HOA correspondence. The lawyer carefully reviewed everything, asked a few questions, and then leaned back in his chair with a smile. He told me this wasn't just a simple complaint. It was a clear case of trespassing, intimidation, and overreach. According to state law, the HOA had violated my rights in multiple ways, and the more they pushed, the stronger my case became. Hearing that confirmation was empowering. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just defending myself. I was holding them accountable. When the case moved forward, the HOA's attitude completely changed. The confidence they had shown on my property vanished once lawyers and judges became involved. In court, facts replaced opinions, and documentation replaced intimidation. The judge asked the HOA representative a series of straightforward questions. Did they have written permission to enter my property? No. Was there an emergency situation that justified immediate access? No. Did HOA rules override state property laws? Absolutely not. With each question, their case weakened, and the courtroom atmosphere shifted. What really turned the case in my favor was that the judge didn't look at this as a single incident. The court examined the entire pattern of behavior, the unauthorized entry, the threatening letters, the fines, and the attempt to pressure me into compliance. It became clear that this wasn't just about stepping onto my land. It was about abuse of authority and the assumption that homeowners won't fight back. The judge acknowledged the emotional stress, the invasion of privacy, and the potential impact on my property value, all caused by the HOA's actions. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge ruled that the HOA had clearly exceeded its authority and violated my rights as a homeowner. The decision wasn't symbolic. It was substantial. The court awarded me $230,000 in damages, covering legal fees, penalties, and compensation for the harm caused. On top of that, the HOA was ordered to revise its policies and formally acknowledge their wrongdoing. The same organization that once walked onto my property uninvited now stood exposed and accountable. Walking out of that courtroom, I didn't feel rich. I felt validated. This wasn't about the money alone. It was about proving that no organization, no matter how powerful or confident, is above the law. HOAs often rely on fear and silence, counting on homeowners to comply without question. But this experience taught me a critical lesson. Knowing your rights is the strongest defense you have. I had ignored that moment in my backyard. If I had assumed the HOA must be right, none of this would have happened. Instead, I chose to document, research, and stand my ground. And that single decision turned an act of trespassing into a life-changing legal victory. So if you ever find yourself in a similar situation,